Alright, this is going to be a mini review of the new Infinity Physics engine that's debuting in Madden NFL 13. This is not going to be a review of the entire game, just of the physics engine. I want to start by saying that I think physics should have been in the game a long time ago, probably 2007 or 2008, but instead we've had to go this entire console generation without it, with a game engine that runs almost identically to the PlayStation 2 versions of the games. One of the biggest improvements that this physics engine is going to introduce is the idea that every player on the field actually now has the potential to influence a play. That doesn't mean that every player on the field is going to influence every single play, but they at least have the potential. Here you see a running back who's going to run into the back of an offensive lineman, and they're going to get their feet tangled, and both players are going to be affected by it and lose balance a little bit. In previous versions of the game, when a runner would run into the back of an offensive lineman, he'd just kind of run in place for a little bit, and a lot of times the defenders would pile up on the offensive lineman and get stuck, and then the runner would be able to just spin out for a big gain. This used to happen a lot when quarterbacks scrambled, and I'm noticing that it's a pretty big problem in NCAA 13, which does not have the Infinity engine. I would like to see a little bit more awareness by the players. I'd like to see the running back actually put his arm out to brace himself or push off. Even in midair, players will still interact, even if they're on the same team. Here you're going to see the runner try to hurdle over a downed offensive lineman. At the same time, the lineman is going to try to stand up. This is going to result in the unfortunate lineman getting a knee shoved up his butt, and the running back is just going to go to the ground and be tackled. One of the biggest area of improvements with the new physics engine is actually in line play. There's still significant problems with the gameplay in the trenches, which I'm not going to go into in depth, but for the first time in a very long time, defensive linemen are actually able to influence the play in a little bit more dynamic fashion. They're actually able to affect the outcome of the play even while engaged or immediately after becoming disengaged from a block. In previous versions of the game, you'd often get stuck in the swim move or spin or bull rush animations, which would continue unimpeded until the end of the animation, and the player would not be able to affect the runner at all. I complained about this in previous games, such as NCAA Football 2012. Here's an example from that game in which I'm going to bull rush an offensive lineman and run right into the runner, but the runner's just going to bounce off as if nothing had happened, because my player is stuck in this animation. Another situation where I'm stuck in an engagement animation and cannot even make an effort to try to stop the runner, even though he literally runs right next to me. And then finally, here's an animation of the player shedding a block, shoving the offensive lineman to the ground, but still not being allowed to make the tackle despite being in the perfect position because he's stuck in this animation, even though the runner runs right through my arm, which is free and available to make the tackle. Those sorts of things aren't happening anymore in Madden 13, at least not as often. Players are actually able to make tackles through blocks. That's not always entirely realistic. Sometimes it's a little bit silly how easily the players are able to do it. But the transitions from the block engagement to the tackles and the break block animations are much more seamless, and it's much easier to make a play as a defensive lineman, and it makes playing as a defensive lineman much more fun because you can actually do things, and being in the correct position actually allows you to affect the play, and as you can see there, you can even tackle blockers, which is fun. Here's an example of a player whose arm is going to be grazed by the runner, and he's going to, I guess I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he's grabbing onto the player's arm and then being pulled into the tackle. This is kind of similar to reaching through a block, which is something that I've been asking to be in the game for a long time. And here's an example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about from a real football game. You're going to see the linebacker is going to hit the blocker, and then reach his arm through the block to attempt to tackle or slow down the running back right there. I don't know if he actually makes the tackle, it's kind of hard to tell, but you can see right here, he's engaged by the blocker, but he's reaching through it to try to hit the offensive lineman, or the offensive runner. I'd like to see that in Madden. This here is a similar situation in which an analogous thing is happening. The defender is actually making the tackle through the block. The problem, though, is that he's not actually making any attempt to do so. The fact that it happens is just a happy accident in this situation. But it's much better than Madden 2012, where you could have a defender stuck in an engagement animation, and the runner can just run right into him and bounce off as if nothing had happened, and keep going, which was absolutely unacceptable and incredibly infuriating. Even when the defender is going to the ground, if you're shoved to the ground by a blocker or you trip and fall over another player, it's still possible for you to make the play on the ball. Here you're going to see this defensive lineman lose his balance after breaking the engagement. He's then going to trip and fall over another offensive lineman who's currently making a pancake block on a defender. So a lot of interactions here, but then as he's stumbling forward, he's actually going to manage to hit and wrap up the ball carrier for a tackle. So that's actually a pretty good example of procedural awareness. You do definitely want to make sure that you watch out for your blockers. Here in this kick return, I'm going to run into 2 blockers, and I'm going to be knocked down by 1, and it is important to note that the game does not rule the play dead until the player is actually touched by a defender. So you could still get up and run, although the players don't ever seem to know this and don't ever make any effort to get up and run, but you can. Another area of the game that is helped a little bit by the new physics engine is with fumble recoveries. In previous versions of the game, you would have the ball would just be sucked into a player's hand, and he'd just pick it up and then keep running. And a lot of times, any time a fumble was recovered by the defense behind the line of scrimmage, it would end up being returned for a touchdown, unless the player recovering the fumble was ridiculously slow. In this game, there's going to be more pile-ups, and since the players, even on the same team, will actually influence each other, you'll oftentimes see the player recovering the fumble trip and fall over his own player and go to the ground. I'd like to see, more actual pile-ups and people fighting for the ball on the ground, but whatever. It's also annoying that the ball itself is not part of the physics simulation. You're going to see here 5 players are going to have their hands in here reaching for the ball, but because number 59 is the first to get to it, it's going to just lock into his hand, almost like it has a magnet in it. And nobody's going to be able to pull it out, even though another defender gets his hand right on top of the ball right there and should be pinning it against the ground, but the defender who has it is going to be able to pull it up and keep going anyway because it is magnetically locked to his hand. This is a problem. I would really like to see this fixed because it really hinders fumble recovery play and onside kicks. Another, nice thing about the physics engine is, collisions occur much more dynamically with defenders. You can see multiple defenders hitting the runner at multiple times during the play, and each one of them is going to influence the runner. It's always not entirely realistic. For example, number 39 here is just going to kind of run by the runner and graze him without actually making any effort to tackle him. He's also going to pull the runner's ball hand away from his body, but not affect the ball at all. There's not going to be a fumble because, as I said before, the ball is magnetically locked to the player's hand. But you get situations, fun situations kind of like this where a player, gets hit by multiple defenders, and the defenders can even knock each other off of the tackle, and the runner can squirt out for a big gain. It makes for exciting football. Again, it's not entirely realistic, but it is at least dynamic. There are some other situations where awkward things are happening during the game. Players contorting in unnatural ways, and things like that. It mostly happens during the post-play cutscenes. So it's purely cosmetic, not a big deal, but it can get pretty ugly, as you can see there. But there are times when the physics seems to freak out or is ignored by the game during the play, and it is a significant problem. Here you're going to see Devin Hester returning a punt. He is going to be tackled by one Packer and is going to be almost all the way to the ground. But then another Packer is going to come in and it's going to trigger a second tackle animation, which is actually going to pull Hester up off of the ground, despite the defender not having any leverage to do so. And Hester is going to be pulled up and rolled over the top of the defender, despite being almost all the way on the ground and in spite of all of his pre-existing downward momentum. This is a difference in about 2.5 yards of field position. It's not a horribly big deal in this particular instance, but imagine if this were a 4th down and goal on the 1 yard line with like 2 seconds left to the game and you're down by 4, and something like this happens that rolls your running back into the end zone. That sort of thing actually would have a significant impact on the game and would be considered very broken. And if it were to go against you, you'd probably be pretty upset. There also seem to be annoying situations in which a player's stats or abilities seem to overrule the physics engine. You're going to see an example here of Arian Foster, who is going to trip and fall over a Jets defender, and is going to look like he's about to do a complete face plant. His legs are completely kicked out from underneath him. He has no support at all. But because Arian Foster is a super stud running back, he is apparently capable of defying gravity, and as you'll notice, all of his downward momentum seems to stop for a fraction of a second, but noticeable in the instant replay. And it's going to happen just long enough for him to kick his left foot out underneath him to rebalance himself. The game is going to completely ignore the fact that he still has downward momentum in his chest and in his head, which should continue to pull him down towards doing that face plant, and should require him to, at the very least, get his arm out below him to stabilize himself. But no, the game is going to treat him like a single point mass, and as soon as he gets that one leg down, all of his downward momentum stops, and he's able to restabilize and keep going for a touchdown. This sort of thing is absolutely unacceptable, and I've seen it happen multiple times. I've seen Michael Vick do it, I've seen Cam Newton do it, I've seen Chris Johnson do it, I've seen Adrian Peterson do it. The very good players are capable of doing things like this, where they just turn off the physics engine and defy gravity so that they can make big plays. And that defeats the entire purpose of having a physics engine to begin with. The reason we want a physics engine is so that every play is happening dynamically and naturally. And if the game is just going to turn off gravity for a fraction of a second to let players make big plays, then we don't even need a physics engine to begin with. The reason we want it is so that the game isn't putting its fingers all over the place and manipulating the gameplay, to make things happen that it thinks should happen. And that's completely unacceptable. After you've played Madden for a long time and you see the way the AI manipulates the animations to make big plays happen, when the game introduces real-time physics and you see the physics just being turned off for things like this, it is incredibly frustrating. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it is game-breaking. And this absolutely needs to be fixed. So, in summary, the physics engine is a improvement over previous versions of the game, but it is not by any means a fix-all. And a lot of work still needs to be done, and the developers need to put a little bit more time into making sure that the physics engine is being universally applied. The occasional glitch is acceptable, that's going to happen, but the AI should not be allowed to manipulate physics in order to make players make big plays.